light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all. Lynne Scott Haggerman bringing the fire. Words that ignite hearts burning higher. Faith and power, no chains combined. Step into the light and leave fear behind.
Welcome to Patriots Prayer Network. I'm Lynne Scott Haggerman, where faith meets truth, fear has no place, and courage, anchored in Christ, leads the conversation. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a survivor of child trafficking and medical experimentation that occurred underground at a U.S. University medical center tied to declassified government MKUltra programs. I am the voice they tried to silence, and I am silent no more. Praise God. Today, I stand as an international award-winning human resource consultant, marathoner and weightlifter, living proof that restoration is possible in mind, body, and spirit. My call is clear and unwavering. I'm to expose the darkness, elevate survivors and whistleblowers, reveal the truth, restore lives, and protect the little ones. This broadcast airs Tuesday through Friday and Sunday across all broadcast platforms with the Patriots Prayer Network at 2 o'clock Central Time. Please be sure to visit qgrit.org and sign up for our newsletter. That's God's aftercare plan for the little ones once they're rescued from above ground and below ground trafficking, as well as to help adults with any type of trauma. And please be sure to visit liveyoungerwithlynne.com, where I'm an independent distributor of LifeWave. LifeWave won the Stem Cell Innovator of the Year award, and it's time to get healthy and stay healthy because we have work to do for such a time as this. Now, let's continue bringing everything into the light and presence of God. My guest today is Andrew Arthur. He is a former immigration judge and national security expert who's now a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. He has experience handling thousands of deportation and asylum cases. He's drafted landmark laws like the Secure Fence Act and Real ID. He's prosecuted alien terrorists at the DOJ and the INS, testified before Congress over 15 times. He brings unmatched insider knowledge on enforcement and security. In 2026, President Trump's crackdown is delivering results. We're seeing deportations surging, illegal border crossings crashing down to record lows, but financial burdens still persist, and it hits us, we the people, taxpayers, pretty hard. Art's going to reveal the realities and the real solutions to this issue. So welcome so much, Art. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Lynn.
You are very welcome. I want to jump in and tell us, first of all, about the CIS. What is this organization and what do they do?
So the Center for Immigration Studies is a Washington-based think tank. We're the only think tank that examines the impact of immigration on the economy, on the culture, on the security of the United States. We've been around for more than 30 years. Again, we're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit. And our experts, all told, have testified on Capitol Hill more than 150 times. And we're one of the leading voices on immigration. We're a very small think tank, but we're typically recognized as being, in the top 50, top 25 most influential think tanks in Washington. So, and of course, you can read our work at cis.org. We have our videos, we have our testimony, we have, I generally do a daily analysis of whatever's breaking in the news, Lynn. So if you see something in immigration, you want to know about it, I can guarantee you that after 8 years at the Center for Immigration Studies, I've written something about it.
I'm sure you have. And I want to encourage everyone to be sure to check out cis.org. I've been there many times researching. It's an amazing site. So I'd like to start out with give us an overview of the current state of U.S. immigration policy under President Trump in early 2026.
So, yeah, it's actually a great question, Lynn. And when we talk about immigration enforcement, certainly when we talked about immigration enforcement under the Biden administration, nearly all of the focus was on the border. In FY 2022, the Biden administration released more than 1.5 million plus into the United States, and that was after Border Patrol agents had apprehended 2.2 million illegal entrants at the southwest border. That was far and away the largest year for illegal immigration to the United States. And as a federal judge in Florida noted in March of 2023, the reason that people were coming to the United States illegally under the Biden administration was because President Biden, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, had put up a flashing "come in, we're open" sign at the southwest border. People were coming in because they knew that if they were apprehended, they were probably going to be released. About 88.5% of all of the illegal migrants who came to the southwest border under the Biden administration were in fact released. So when you hear the president talking about millions, when you hear President Trump talking about millions of aliens who came illegally under the Biden administration, we estimate that anywhere between 8 to 10 million migrants entered the United States illegally during that time. And in fact, the Department of Homeland Security just put out a tweet today that mentioned the fact a significant proportion of the Nicaraguan population came to the United States illegally under President Biden, and they're now through remittances supplying more than 30% of the Nicaraguan economy. And of course, you know about Nicaragua, but for your listeners, it's ruled by the Sandinistas, Marxist rebels who, took over in the 80s. There was a brief period of democracy in the country. Daniel Ortega, the dictator of Nicaragua, is back. So American money is going to fund a Marxist country in Central America. And that's probably the truest legacy of the Biden administration. Now, the other part of that has to do with the interior, where ICE officers go out, take custody of aliens who are unlawfully present in the United States. There have been more than 400,000 arrests under the Trump administration, and 60% of those arrests, Lynn, have involved people who have criminal histories. They either have a criminal conviction or pending criminal charges. So, but, notwithstanding the fact that President Trump, border czar Tom Homan, ICE acting director Todd Lyons are out there apprehending criminals on the street every day. A lot of the media has focused on, what's going on in the streets. A lot of protesters have attempted to interpose themselves into those ICE arrests that have taken place in Minneapolis and Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and other cities. So, the Trump administration, Tom Homan, they're fighting the good fight, but they got a lot against them. So, the Patriot Prayer Network definitely needs some prayers for those two gentlemen.
Amen. I have to back up just a minute, Art, because this was the first time I heard statistics on Nicaragua. We have been hearing that large percentages of money is being transferred to other nations. We've heard about Somalia. I hadn't heard about Nicaragua, but so we're funding, did you say 30% of their economy?
It's actually more than 30% of their economy, Lynn. But, even then, when you talk about Nicaragua, think about remittances to Mexico. Mexico is the 11th largest economy in the world, and yet $80 billion flow in remittances, money sent by Mexican citizens in the United States back to Mexico every year. Those remittances are much larger than the foreign aid that, even the Biden administration, State Department, and USAID sent, which is part of the reason why foreign governments will, interpose themselves, want to say, you need to slow down the removals from the United States because they don't want that money supply to get cut off. But, unfortunately, 20 plus years of, lax enforcement or non-enforcement at the border and in the interior has led to a situation where basically the American economy is propping up dictators all around the world.
So the funds that are going out of the United States, are they from people who have legally immigrated into the United States, or are they from illegal aliens too? Because we're hearing, and I want your statistics. Actually, when I say we're hearing, I read a lot of this from your website, that there's such a giant percentage of people that are on welfare. So are they on welfare and then saving their money and sending it to other nations?
In many instances, they are. And, since you brought up the welfare part, let me explain to you how that goes. Back in 1996, a Republican Congress and President Clinton got together and they passed a welfare reform bill, PRORA. I can't remember what PRORA stands for, but they passed in 1996. And what that did was it put restrictions on immigrants in the United States on their ability to receive means-tested public benefits, food stamps, Medicaid, direct cash payments. And it definitely did have an impact, although the Clinton administration didn't apply that law probably as strictly as it should have. But here's what the law says. If you're a green card holder, if you're a lawful permanent resident, you must have been in the United States for 5 years in order to receive those means-tested public benefits, food stamps, Medicaid, et cetera, that I just detailed. But the Clinton administration narrowed the definition of what those means-tested benefits could be for people who were coming into the United States. So if you were a person who was likely to rely upon the federal dole to support yourself, you could still come into this country so long as you weren't receiving direct cash benefits. But I will say that the 96 law actually did go a long way toward limiting the ability of people to receive those means-tested public benefits. Now, fast forward to the Biden administration, and the Biden administration used a very narrow authority, something called parole, to allow more than 2.8 million foreign nationals into the United States. A significant number of those people were Haitians and Cubans. Under a 1980 law that was passed in response to the Mariel boat crisis, which you may remember, those Haitians and those Cubans aren't subject to that 5-year rule that people that did it the right way are, people who have green cards are. They can receive those means-tested public benefits almost immediately. And so consequently, a large number of Haitian and Cuban nationals are now in the United States. They're receiving food stamps, they're receiving Medicaid, they're receiving cash benefits, and they are sending money back home to Cuba and Haiti, definitely two of the poorer countries in the Western Hemisphere, to support those individuals. There's another form of public benefit that we don't think of very often, but it's a pretty apt one, and that is public school education. If you come to the United States illegally and you bring your kids with you, under a 1982 Supreme Court decision called Plyler versus Doe, states and localities must provide those children with a free public school education. It's free for the kids. It's not free for the American taxpayer. And in most localities, those public schools are funded one of two ways: one, through property tax, and two, through local sales taxes. So one thing that we do know about the flow of migrants that came into the United States under the Biden administration is that it included 500,000 plus school-age children. The average state and locality pays about $17,000 per pupil for each child who attends school. When you multiply 500,000 by 17,000, you get up to $8.5 billion per year that every one of us is paying. We're paying it in our property taxes and we're paying it in our sales taxes for those kids to go to school. In fact, I actually think that the number is higher than 500,000. I think it's closer to 1 million. But even if I take that lower number, it's $8.5 billion per community. Now, of course, there's another big issue, two big issues when you talk about that school-age population. One is few, if any, of those children speak English. That means that schools have to then invest in English as a second language teachers to teach those children first in their native language and then to teach them English. The other critical part of this analysis is that most school budgets are done on a biannual basis. They apportion their budgets every 2 years, which means that when all of those children were flowing into the United States with their parents illegally, they were flowing into schools that weren't ready for them. They didn't know that they were going to get a huge influx of students. They didn't know that they were going to get a huge influx of students who couldn't speak English. Now, those English language second learners cost school districts about 20% more than the average English speaking pupil. So that is an additional cost that is added onto the budget. So if you're wondering why your kid's class size has, grown, why your kid's learning in a trailer when he wasn't learning in a trailer before, and why your child doesn't seem to be learning as quickly as your child used to, it's because they're being slowed down by those English as a second language learners, because those kids are, and nobody blames the kids, but those kids are, going into the classrooms, they're increasing the classroom sizes. So yeah, there are so many downstream impacts of this, but here's probably the key takeaway. About 59% of all illegal alien-headed households receive at least one means-tested public benefit. They normally receive that through their children who are born here in the United States. Food stamps is the biggest. If you come here illegally, you're probably not a lawyer. You're probably not a doctor or an engineer. You're going into one of those entry-level jobs that the American taxpayers support for Americans. But, there's no limit on that. If the child is born here and the child is a United States citizen, then you are going to be providing Medicaid for that child. You're going to be providing food stamps for that child. You're going to be providing cash benefits for that child, and you're going to be paying to educate that child. So again, nobody faults the children, but we do fault the parents who decided that they were going to break our laws, who are now imposing billions of dollars in costs on us.
Do you know, Art? I mean, so my first thought is this is completely unsustainable. This whole is completely unsustainable. But do you know if 59% of illegal aliens are receiving government benefits because of children being born here, are we seeing the population then of the illegal aliens' children growing rapidly in order to get even more benefits? Do you have any statistics on that?
Well, until the Supreme Court rules in the case of Barber versus Trump, which is the case that is challenging President Trump's birthright citizenship order, all of those children are United States citizens and considered such for census purposes. So there's no real way to determine which of those children were born to foreign parents or were born to United States citizen parents. We can more or less reach conclusions about that, certainly with respect to the impact that they have on those means-tested public benefits and the public fisc. But determining real numbers is very difficult. But you can assume that a significant proportion of recent births involve children who are born to parents who are immigrants, either lawful or otherwise.
Tell us, I know you were a judge in the past. Tell us about this court case that's happening. Help us understand what it is President Trump's asking and why they're pushing back, and what do you think will happen?
It's a great question. So one of the first executive orders that President Trump issued had to do with birthright citizenship. And what he did in that order was he directed federal government heads, the secretaries of the various agencies, to not issue documents that can only be issued to United States citizens to any individual who was born in the United States to parents who did not have permanent status here. So if the mother was an illegal alien and the father was a foreign student, that child would not be a citizen. If both parents were illegal aliens, the child would not be a citizen. And the president is doing this based upon his interpretation of the first clause of the 14th Amendment, which state all persons who are born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof shall be citizens of the United States and the states in which they reside. So the key question there is what exactly that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, means. Now, if you go back, and that was one of the post-Civil War amendments, it was one that was created in order to give citizenship to freed, formerly enslaved people in this country. It definitely didn't include members of Indian tribes who at the time were recognized as their own nations. And it almost definitely didn't apply to children of foreign nationals who were in the United States, but didn't have permanent residence in this country. All of this came down to a Supreme Court decision that was issued in the 1890s called Wong Kim Ark versus United States. And Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco. He was born in Chinatown, right on Sacramento Street, to two parents who were the 19th century version of green card holders. Mr. Wong went abroad. He went to China, and when he tried to come back into the United States, he was stopped at the port of San Francisco because what they said was he actually was a subject of the Chinese emperor. He was not a United States citizen. He didn't have a right to enter the United States. Wong challenged that to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court found that because his parents were the 19th century version of green card holders, and because he was born in San Francisco, that he therefore was a United States citizen. But that court went a little bit further, and they found that basically all children born to foreign nationals in the United States, other than diplomats, other than members of Indian tribes, and other than anybody who was born in a section of the United States that was, then under foreign government control, was a citizen. In the law, Lynn, we refer to that as dicta. That's, something that the court says, but it's not binding on other courts. But in the 130 years ever since that decision was issued, we've all generally assumed that everybody who was born to in this country who's not born to a diplomat is a United States citizen. The Trump administration is challenging that. Now, the main challenge to that is, a typical Washington, D.C. response. We've never done it that way, so we can't do it that way now, which, I think the court is probably going to reject. There are some, there's a lot of legislative history surrounding this provision. And of course, because it's a constitutional amendment, Lynn, it went to debates in all of the state legislatures before it was passed, because 2/3 of the states had to adopt that constitutional amendment before it took effect. So the hearing is going to be on April the 1st. You're probably going to hear a lot of discussion from, very thoughtful people on both sides of the issue. And they're largely going to be quoting floor debates that took place in the various states and in the United States Congress back in the 1860s when this was passed. But let me just, put a bit of gloss on this to give you an idea of what they did mean. Prior to the passage of the 14th Amendment, Congress passed something called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It was passed by a Republican Congress, and it was signed by one of the greatest Republican presidents, but probably one of the most overlooked, Ulysses Grant. Actually, no, it was passed by, it's funny because we'll get back to that point.
Okay.
It was actually vetoed by a person who wasn't a Democrat, but was Abraham Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson. Johnson, of course, was a Democrat from Tennessee, and he didn't like the bill because of what it did. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 made freed slaves citizens of the United States. Andrew Johnson, being from a formerly slave-owning state, didn't like that, so he vetoed it. But the Republican Congress overrode his veto and it became law. And here's how the Civil Rights Act of 1866 put it. All persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power are citizens of the United States and the states in which they reside. So it was slightly different verbiage. But the reason that Congress passed the 14th Amendment was because they'd had this experience with Andrew Johnson. They'd seen that, anything that is done by Congress can be undone by Congress or by a future president. And they didn't want to make the citizenship of Black people in the United States subject to the whims of former slave owners. And for that reason, they decided to put it in the Constitution where it would be safe from overreach like they had seen with Johnson. And so, the difference between those two terms, not subject to any foreign power or subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, probably didn't make a lot of difference in the minds of the people who were drafting it. But there's no way that you could say that a illegal alien in the United States is not subject to a foreign power. They're citizens of another country. So I think you're going to hear a lot about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, a lot about Andrew Johnson, a lot about the 14th Amendment coming up. And the reason, of course, that I had brought up Ulysses Grant is because, one, he's one of my own personal heroes. He was one of my father's personal heroes. But, after the experience with Andrew Johnson, Ulysses Grant, of course, took over as president. He was elected in the election of 1868. And, he really went through and he imposed those civil rights acts on, the recalcitrant slave owners in the South. And he was a big fan of the 14th Amendment. He was a huge proponent of it because he had seen the valor of Black troops in the Union Army, and he wanted their sacrifice to be recognized.
I think that's amazing. We'll have all eyes on this to watch it moving forward because that's a huge impact to the United States. I remember one time, my day job is a human resource consultant. I was working with a company headquartered in Brazil, and one of the women there was pregnant in Brazil, and she was talking and she goes, yeah, she says, I'm debating if I should take vacation whenever I'm going to deliver my baby so my baby could be a U.S. citizen. And I sat there and I thought, what the, that does not make you a we the people, USA, flag waving American. I mean, I was appalled. I was appalled. And this was, a few years ago. And I thought, that's not right. It is absolutely not right that anyone from any nation can just have birth on U.S. soil and they're a U.S. citizen. That does not make a person a U.S. citizen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Lynn, that isn't, a rare occurrence. The Wall Street Journal about a month ago printed a article that talked about a Chinese billionaire who's never been to the United States, who through surrogates in the United States has fathered a large number of children. And apparently this has become a trend in the People's Republic of China for oligarchs to do that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an abuse, but it reminds me of one of my earliest cases when I was a young trial attorney in San Francisco, California myself. There was an Ethiopian woman who had a multiple entry visa, and every time she got 8 months pregnant, she would fly from Addis Ababa to San Francisco. She would check herself into a California hospital for basically a California welfare hospital. She would give birth to her child. She would go down to Market Street to the State Department office down there. She'd pick up a passport for the child and she would fly back to Addis Ababa. And when this case came across my desk, it was the fourth time that she had done this, and she was flagged by immigration, and they wanted to deport her and take away her visa. Now, I did, in fact, win that case, but that was only after she had given birth to 4 United States citizen children. And she's probably living in San Francisco herself, probably still going to the same charity hospital that she was going to then.
It's it's just so this whole conversation is so appalling on many levels. The other thing that crosses my mind about this conversation is the number of United States citizens being killed by illegal aliens in various ways, either direct attacks and homicides, or truck drivers that can't speak English and they're working for fake truck driving firms and they're killing people on the road. And we're just hearing so much about this. And I know whenever you were a judge, you actually handled, I believe, cases like this of illegal aliens that were here harming U.S. citizens. Tell me about that part of this story today.
Yeah, so I was a judge at a detained court in York, Pennsylvania. York, Pennsylvania isn't a big immigrant town, but they would rent out space at the local prison to ICE to house respondents, aliens in removal proceedings. And in addition to the individuals that were housed at the York County Prison, I also had jurisdiction over the entire Pennsylvania correctional system, and I had jurisdiction over 2 federal penitentiaries, Federal Correctional Institution Moshannon and Federal Correctional Institution Allenwood. And so, yeah, I saw, thousands of cases involving individuals who had engaged in criminal activity in the United States, who had harmed American citizens, who had, peddled drugs, poison on the streets of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New Jersey, Baltimore. And yeah, those stories are shocking. But, here's the thing, Lynn. Back in the day, there were a significant number of crimes that were carried out by aliens, some of them green card holders, some of them here illegally in the United States. But the Biden border policies really turbocharged that. If you come to the United States legally, you have to go to a State Department consular office or abroad. You have to file an application, and you have to prove that you don't have a criminal history. You have to bring a police report from your local police chief. You have to provide, a certificate of good conduct, in essence, just to get a visa to come legally to the United States, which is part of the reason why you'll hear many people on the left and some libertarians say immigrants commit fewer crimes than United States citizens do. It's true because there are a large number of legal immigrants to the United States. Lynn, we accept 1 million people for lawful permanent residence every year. That's a huge number, larger than many of the states in our union. And all of those people have been pre-screened for criminality. They've also been pre-screened for illnesses and things like that. But when you come illegally, as millions did under the Biden administration, and you're simply released at the border, there's no way for us to vet you for criminality. So if you wonder why so many Tren de Aragua members of the Venezuelan prison gang managed to make their way into the United States under the Biden administration, why so many MS-13 members, 18th Street members, why so many, cartel members from Mexican drug cartels like the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel, or the Jalisco New Generation cartel managed to make it into the United States. It's because under the system that Alejandro Mayorkas, DHS Secretary Joe Biden, president, set up, there was no way for us to screen those people. They were simply released into the United States. And you can, I'll just list some names. Rachel Morin, mother of 5, murdered in Baltimore, raped and murdered in Baltimore. We have Laken Riley, nursing student, subject to an attack in broad daylight in the college town of Athens, Georgia. Jocelyn Nungare, beautiful young woman in Houston who was abused, murdered, and left in a culvert in Houston, Texas. The list goes on. But, the reason that Rachel Morin's murderer and that Laken Riley's murderer, Jocelyn Nungale's murderers were able to be in the United States to carry out their crimes is because they were stopped at the border. They were released into the country under the Biden administration. We weren't able to screen them for crimes. And they were, simply allowed to do whatever they wanted in this country. Here's the thing, Lynn, and I know you have experience in law enforcement, and Lord knows I do. Nobody commits a heinous murder as their first crime. If you've, murdered a nursing student in broad daylight, you probably have a rather lengthy criminal record back home. But there was no way for our hardworking Border Patrol agents, our diligent ICE officers to identify those people because Venezuela wasn't going to tell us who their criminals were. And in fact, when you heard President Trump on the campaign trail say that Venezuela had opened its prisons and its mental hospitals, I got so many calls from reporters asking me for proof about that. And my response was, "You're the reporter. Why don't you check it out?" But as we look at the, as we look at the trail of carnage that, especially the Venezuelans in particular, have left behind them in the United States, it's likely that they did that. Speaking of Mariel, we know that Fidel Castro did that. About 150,000 people came from Cuba directly to the United States under the Carter administration during the Mariel boat lift. And even the Washington Post had to admit that about 25,000 of those people had criminal records or had serious mental illnesses that made them dangerous to the community in the United States. And, having to deal with the aftermath as a trial attorney for the INS, as an associate general counsel for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, as an advisor to the Attorney General, and as an immigration judge, I can assure you that many of those Mariel Cubans were some of the most dangerous individuals I've ever met. Again, this isn't a slight on the Cuban people. The Cuban people, are, hardworking, vibrant. They turned Miami into the metropolis that it is today. But those 25,000 criminals probably did the work of, a million American criminals or a million Americans, most of whom don't have criminal records themselves. So, the Biden administration didn't learn anything from that, but I can almost guarantee you that Nicolas Maduro, former dictator, and I'm proud to say that, of Nicaragua, learned from his political godfather, Fidel Castro. And in fact, you'll note that when Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, died, again, another Marxist, when he died, he didn't die in Venezuela. He died in a hospital in Cuba. So tightly tied are the government in Caracas and the government in Havana. So, yeah, the Venezuelans definitely took a page out of Fidel Castro's playbook. They used the opportunity to ship criminals to the United States. And we're going to be dealing with the aftermath, the tragic, horrible aftermath of that for at least a decade.
Which makes me think about the deportations. How are we doing with the deportations? It's my understanding that primarily, at least initially, the Trump administration is going after these criminals. Is that happening? How many have been deported? Tell us about that side of things.
Boy, howdy, is that happening, as we say in my home in North Carolina.
Good.
Hundreds of thousands, by my count, more than 400,000 individuals have been deported from the United States since Donald Trump returned. And that's a huge number. Now, people will tell you that, Barack Obama was the deporter in chief, but here's the part they won't tell you. Most of the people who entered the United States illegally at the border under Obama were single adult males from Mexico. Border Patrol could process those folks, turn them around in about 8 hours, and about 27% or more of them simply came back and counted twice. So when you hear that, Barack Obama deported 400,000 people, well, yeah, he did. But, half of those people were, Mexicans that were apprehended at the border and simply turned around. Because the border numbers are so low, Donald Trump, border czar Tom Homan, can't play that game. When they do 400,000 plus deportations, those are individuals who were living in the United States. And again, more than 60 to 70% of those individuals were criminals a lot of murderers, a lot of drug dealers, a lot of kidnappers, a lot of rapists, and a lot of child molesters who are no longer be able to live on the streets of the United States. Now, Lynn, you're a smart woman. You're probably asking yourself, probably want to say to me, by the way, people call me Art. You probably want to say to me, my friends do, and I consider you my friend. You're going to say, Art, how is it that Tom Homan could have so many criminal aliens in the United States? And I'd respond as follows. The Biden administration deliberately didn't deport large numbers of criminal aliens who were here. And in fact, in 2022, the states of Texas and Louisiana sued DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and President Joe Biden because they weren't deporting more criminals from the United States. Louisiana, Texas, they were holding these people in their custody. They knew they should be deported. They knew they were aliens, and they wanted ICE to come and pick them up when their sentences were over. And Alejandro Mayorkas said no. He kept a tight leash on ICE. He wouldn't let them deport, any except for the worst of the worst of the worst. I guess that's worst cubed. I got to think about it in arithmetic terms. But and so consequently, they were returned to the streets to commit more crimes. When Donald Trump came in, when he gave Tom Homan the job of rounding up all of those individuals, Tom Homan, again, here's another North Carolinian idiom, was hunting in a baited field because there was such a backlog of criminals. Right, even right now, of the 1.6 million aliens who are under final orders of removal, people who have received their due process from immigration judges, like I used to be, and who have no right to be here and are simply waiting to be removed. There are 1.6 million of them. Half of them, Lynn, 800,000 of them have criminal histories. So Tom Homan is just getting started. Unfortunately, I think that when the administration started out, it was sort of a scattershot approach. You saw a lot of people, chasing people down in the streets doing that. That's not how Tom Homan does his business. It's targeted. When Tom Homan sends 2 officers out to pick somebody up, they're going to find that person. They're going to take them into custody. They're going to be held, and those 2 officers will be out. They're going to do those pickups 2, 3, 4 times a day. So the administration is now on a good basis. Again, they picked up a lot of criminals before. They're going to pick up a whole lot of criminals now.
Why, in your opinion, did the Biden administration not get rid of these horrific criminals whenever they knew that they were here?
Well, I'm going to give you the answer, Lynn, but you're not going to like it. And you're probably not going to hear it from anybody else, but I can prove it. They did it because they thought the immigration laws of the United States were discriminatory. And in fact, in a memo that was issued in September of 2021, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas compared the immigration laws of the United States to Jim Crow, to the color bar, to the worst laws that existed in the United States that were intended to discriminate against Black people. They directly equated them to that. And they said that not enforcing those laws was providing, some sort of reparative justice for the, discrimination that had existed in this country 70, 80, 90, 100, 150 years ago. And I tell people that, and they don't generally believe it. But if you go on our website, CIS.org, and you just Google, type in the words, the one crucial paragraph, it'll take you to the one crucial paragraph in that memo that explains that.
That's wild. So my day job, I do my international human resource consulting. And in the United States, when it comes to the term discrimination, we have laws on the books, Title VII, Title IX, Title III, specifically discuss discrimination. It's for U.S. citizens that those laws are applied against, first of all. And this topic, of course, are the illegal aliens. So I find it ludicrous, laughable, but it's so serious, ludicrous that they are using that reparations mentality to try to justify keeping criminals in the United States. I've not heard that, Art. I am so grateful to hear that analogy, to the rationale behind it. because as irrational as it is, the way they think, their thinking is irrational. So it makes sense at that level why they would do that. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to use what Steely Dan referred to as pretzel logic in order to get to that point. But and I hear, and again, there were plenty of other positive impacts that this had for the Biden administration. Most of those people, once released into the United States, went to heavily Democratic states, New York, California,
Right.
Illinois. And those are states that are all bleeding out their own citizens. My home state of North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the union. And you could look at the license plates of the people who are arriving here, and you know exactly where they're coming from. And they're coming here because, we have sensible governance, fair laws, and, reasonable taxes. Nobody's ever going to say their taxes are great. But when those illegal aliens, when those released migrants went to those states, they bolstered the population. And under the Constitution, when we apportion seats in Congress, when we apportion seats in the Electoral College, we do it based on the population, not the population of citizens, Lynn, which is the logical way that it would be done, but on the total population. And so, it worked out for a lot of Democrats that they didn't lose their seats, that they probably won't lose their seats in the next apportionment, because they're basically, representing districts in which, 20% or more of all the residents can't vote because they don't have any status in this country. Good for them, not so good for the American people.
So I'm not sure I've heard this before. So you're saying that the way our laws read, that the seats are determined purely by population, not whether it's a U.S. citizen or not. It's just how many people are in that area.
Absolutely.
And that's the law. I did not know that. That's not a good law.
It's not a good law. And in much the same way that the Trump administration is challenging that questionable 1890s Supreme Court decision in Wong Kim Ark, the Trump administration is also preparing challenges to the apportionment clause of the Constitution to say, at the time that, our founding fathers, wise men that they were, drafted the apportionment clause, that it meant to only cover citizens, not people who were here unlawfully.
So I also want to cover, you were touching before on ICE, Minnesota, Minneapolis, the mess that's going on there, which we know too is in many other states. With what's going on in Minnesota, is your understanding that the Somali fraud, are they illegal aliens or are they actually legal residents of the United States? Do you know?
We don't know because the exact extent of that fraud has not been totally revealed. There were 70 plus cases of fraud. By the way, Lynn, the Somali fraud in Minneapolis has been ongoing since 2022. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Minnesota actually began filing cases back in 2022. And yet, for some reason, when Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, was running for vice president, you never heard anything about this in the media. Curious how that worked out. But now here is the interesting thing that I will tell you about the foreign-born Somali population in the United States. They understand our laws probably better than we do. When I went back and I looked at how many individuals who were born in Somalia, who were still immigrants, who still had green cards in this country, or who were here illegally, the number was exceptionally low. Only 16% of the Somali-born population in the United States doesn't have citizenship. One of the things that they understood, that I wish a lot of Americans understood better, was that you need to figure out the rules in the United States, and you need to work those rules to the best of your ability. So many of those people who have engaged in the fraud, who are Somali nationals, are in fact naturalized citizens. If that fraud pre-existed their naturalization, then the Justice Department and Joe Edlow, the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, will have the opportunity to denaturalize those individuals and deport them back home. But, in many of those cases, they were smart enough, they got their citizenship, and only then did they begin to engage in shady practices. I think that's how we're going to find out that it went. But yeah, I mean, I think that, and again, what we've seen with Somalis in Minnesota isn't unique to Somalis in Minnesota. We've seen, fraud-based scams, national fraud-based scams like this all over the country. We've seen it in Florida. We've seen it in states across the United States from certain individuals born in West Africa. In Florida, it's primarily a Caribbean-based affair. But yeah, it really is interesting. But of course, there's a lot of American fraud. I don't think the American people will ever find out what percentage of their tax dollars is wasted on fraud or goes into corrupt pockets. But if they did, they'd probably want to stop paying taxes for a couple of years just to get a breather. So, but yeah, now, as these cases go on, I think the next thing we're going to see is denaturalizations and then deportations of a lot of those people.
And tell me again what denaturalization means.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a great question. I apologize. Whenever I use jargon, stop me.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you are a green card holder in the United States, then within 3 to 5 years of obtaining your green card, you can apply to become a citizen through a process called naturalization. And it literally, means exactly what it says. You change the nature of that individual. They go from being an alien, from being a foreign-born national or a foreign national in the United States to becoming a citizen. And their citizenship is, I was born in the suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland, and they are true Americans as you and I are. And in fact, one of the best parts of my job of being an immigration judge was swearing in new citizens. You really get to see people who care a lot about the United States when you do that, because they've gone the extra mile. I was born with it. They have to, go and, seek it out. But, if an individual lies in the denaturalization process, if they're not forthcoming with the U.S. government, we don't simply have to throw up our hands and accept the fact that they're here forever. If they lied, if they engaged in fraud in that naturalization process, there are tools available to the United States government called denaturalization, where we can deport them. Probably the most famous denaturalization case, and this is one you're going to be familiar with, was John Demjanjuk. John Demjanjuk was I think he was an auto worker living in the Midwest. But when he came to the United States, he failed to mention the fact that he'd also been a guard at a death camp at Treblinka. He was known as Ivan the Terrible in the days when he was a guard. And he lost his citizenship and he was deported back to Poland to face criminal charges in connection with that. So yeah, it's a process. Again, most people who naturalize do it for all the best purposes. They want to be, citizens, and they want to contribute to this country. Some don't. And fortunately, Congress and our founding fathers were wise enough to know we didn't have to suffer their presence here.
So then, Art, can I start hoping that these Somalians in Minnesota who are likely naturalized can be put in the denaturalization process because of their criminal enterprises? Is that a very possible thing?
Yeah, in fact, it's not only possible, it's likely. We've already seen, I referred to Joe Edlow over at CIS before, probably the hardest working government employee you've never heard of. They've already, launched some denaturalization cases against some other people who had engaged in fraud. And I think that, the Somalis in Minnesota and some other parts of the country, other nationals who did naturalize are going to lose that status, the most precious status you could have. From a political standpoint, and they're going to be sent back home.
And so then once it happens, they're sent home, they can't come back, the end, just they get the boot and we don't have to deal with it again?
Never, ever again.
I find that exciting, Art. You know, we're hard pressed at times to hear good news out of that Minnesota Somali mess that we know is across the nation. So that really brings joy to my heart. And shout out Meg, JJR, Outlaw Dogs. I see you guys all. This is a time for celebration. I see everybody in the chat, so want to shout out to them, Art. I think that's exciting. With whenever you were talking about, we have 1 million legals, um, 1 million people becoming U.S. citizens a year. That seems like a lot to me. Is that? I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, I am all for people who work hard and meet Gracie the cat. She normally makes an appearance sometime. We talked about our pets back in the green room before the show started, but yeah. So what about, you know, the people who are vetted, who want to make a who want to assimilate in the United States? They want to make a contribution. They work hard. We know that they're good people. They can contribute. They'll assimilate in. Is 1 million the annual amount? And what does CIS think about that number? Is that a good number? Is that too many? What about that?
So yeah, 1 million people get green cards every year. They get lawful permanent residence, which means that they, you know, so long as they don't commit any crimes, they can live here, work here. You know, they're put on a path to citizenship every year. 1 million is probably too high a number. Again, it's about 240,000 more people that live in Wyoming, which means that we're getting 1.25 Wyomings in new green card holders every year. So, you know, the number definitely needs to come down, and it's much higher than the sponsors of the 1965 Immigration Act that, you know, have facilitated this flow of people to the United States had promised. But there's a bigger issue with respect to that population than simply the size. Okay. About 63% of all of those 1 million people that come here annually are family-based immigrants. They're not allowed into the United States because of the skills that they bring or what they can contribute to, you know, our culture or our economy. They come here because of who they're related to. Now, everybody agrees that if you're married and you have kids and you get a green card, that you should be allowed to bring your spouse and your kids with you, your minor kids with you. That's fair. Yeah. But under the laws as they're written right now, Lynn, you can petition for a green card for your adult brother. And your brother, when he comes here, can bring his kids with him. There's no guarantee that those family migrants have any skills or abilities at all. There's no guarantee that they're not going to be takers in our economic system, you know, instead of givers. Only about 20 to 25% of all immigration to the United States right now is skills-based. People who are chosen to come here because of the skills that they bring. In his 2018 State of the Union address, President Trump called on Congress to change that. And he did it based on a calculus that was offered by a woman many of your listeners or viewers are going to know, Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan was a civil rights icon. President Clinton appointed her to be the head of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform. And in 1995, Ms. Jordan made the following statement. Absent compelling circumstances, immigration to the United States should be based on skills. And, you know, but unfortunately, that calculus is completely upside down. Congress never acted on President Trump's request at the 2018 State of the Union address. And that same system continues today. I think most people probably assume that if you're lucky enough to, you know, come to the United States, that you have some great skills. But the way the system's set up, it's probably not likely. Instead, you're probably going to be put into direct competition with what Barbara Jordan called the least advantaged Americans, members of minority groups, individuals, inner city youth, and recent legal immigrants who hadn't adjusted to life in the United States thus far. So, yeah, we really need to rethink the way that we do it. And in fact, we do it the opposite way that the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, the other 4 great immigrant receiving countries, do it. They do it based on a point system. You get to go to those countries based on the skills, based on what you're going to be bringing to those countries, not what you're going to be taking from them.
Well, and we the people would agree with that because, I, for one, and I'm sure you would agree, I know everyone in chat would agree, and everyone listening in the sound of my voice, I'm sick of paying taxes that go to people who aren't working, have no skills, that come in the country like that. And I'm sick of paying taxes for many other reasons too, I have to say, Art. I'm just sick of paying taxes because we're seeing all this fraud and how our tax dollars are being money laundered through various organizations, and it's reached a point. But anyway, with the people who come in who lack skills, that puts them instantly on welfare, which was how we began our conversation. So as we close, what I would like to know is what do you see happening, in the next few months, the next year, in the Trump administration with this topic? What else do you see coming?
So, one, I think that the border is going to continue to be secure. Donald Trump tapped a man named Rodney Scott, former Border Patrol chief, a guy who really knows the border well, to be his Customs and Border Protection Commissioner. And Chief Scott has done a fabulous job down there. Again, the numbers came out for last month. We're talking about all-time lows. So the border is going to continue to be secure. And now that we see Tom Homan, taking the helm of all of those interior deportations, I think you're going to see a huge number of criminals, high-profile criminals, flying out of the United States. And once those individuals disappear, once people know that Homan means business, that he's a serious man, that he doesn't put up flashy videos, that he doesn't, go out there self-promoting, but that he does the job, they're going to want to leave too. We've already seen about 1.2 million people voluntarily depart the United States who are here unlawfully. I think that's going to rev up. I think we're probably going to see 2 million self-deports and probably about 500,000 criminals leaving the United States in the next year.
I find that to be wonderful, refreshing news, Art. We don't hear a lot of wonderful, refreshing news, and I consider those big victories and big wins in this terrible topic. So as we close, what are some final comments that you have for us, and how can we, the people, help? What can we do?
That's a great question, and it's one that I get all the time. The first thing that you could do to help is to educate yourself. And, well, there's no better place to do that than at cis.org. Every day, I generally write at least one article that, breaks down in pretty simple terms what's going on. But, there are a number of other places that you can go to that will, provide you with the information that you need to cut through the clutter of what you see in the mass media. And two, once you've educated yourself, you need to be a good citizen. You need to be the person that shows up at the town hall, at the school board meeting. You need to be the person who, goes to places where people debate the issues. And you need not be afraid. Remember, be not afraid, saith the Lord. And, take a look at one of Speaker Mike Johnson's favorite passages from the Bible, Romans 11, and, see, how we should respond to our government, how we should support to our government, and how individuals should do the same. But yeah, reach out to your representatives. They want to hear from you. Well, they probably don't want to hear from you, but they need to hear from you. We have a saying in Washington, D.C., and, I spent 8 years on Capitol Hill in addition to everything else. If you don't represent your constituents, pretty soon you won't be representing your constituents. So, our members of Congress need to know what their constituents want so that they can best represent them. Sometimes they need a little nudge to do the right thing, but, all things are possible with God.
Amen. Amen. Well said. Well, thank you again, Art, for being on. I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I love what CIS does. You guys bring the receipts with you. You've got the numbers down, and it's very refreshing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome. And until next time, everyone, this is Lynne Scott Haggerman, where light is breaking through and truth is rising, and so are we. Praise God.
Light breaks, the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call.